Hey, Marcus Eriksen, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Dave. Good to see you.
Good to be here. Dave Ford here with the SoulBuffalo Earth Report, and one of my favorite people in the world, Mr. Marcus Eriksen, who's the founder of co-founder of Five Gyres, and one of the sort of leading scientists in the world on all things ocean plastics, microplastics, and just really excited to have you here today on the Earth Report.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. It's good to see everyone in the audience. Again, many of you we sailed together, less than 2 years ago. Time is totally discombobulated in these COVID times. But the work on plastics, it still continues. And there is so much talk now about a global treaty. The world's coming together, looking for international strategy. And the science there's still a frontier of science that we're still pushing and understanding more. And I'd love to have a conversation with you, Dave, and share some of the work we've done.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig in there. In full transparency, we were having some computer issues. So I'm running this live stream from my own computer for the first time. And so anything can happen. But the one thing is for sure is that Marcus is here and I'm here. And together we're going to have a really good conversation. So Marcus was the expedition leader on our expedition in the middle of the Atlantic Gyre last May, where we had 165 activist and industry leaders in the middle of and that was a pretty incredible journey, Marcus.
That was an epic voyage.
It definitely changed my life. Talk a little bit about your experience in the Atlantic Gyre. Like that was not Marcus's first time, but there was more plastic out there that time than any other time before, right?
There was quite a bit, and that sort of parallels our work on looking at the global trend over time. The first time I went to the North Atlantic was back in 2010. That was actually our first expedition to the Five Gyres Institute, and we sailed from Bermuda. The same as Ocean Plastic Leadership Summit. We almost traced the same route. We went due east. We found a lot of trash stuck in the Sargassum, and since then, in these last 10 years. The amount of production of plastics and the demand as a rising class grows globally, so does the global population. That means increased waste. And our strategy on a global scale to manage all this hasn't kept up. So yes, to answer your question, there's more trash out there this time around.
We found all kinds of stuff out there in the middle of the Atlantic Gyre, and it was really pretty powerful and pretty emotional for a lot of folks that had never been out there before. There's so much going on right now, and just in general, there's a lot in the zeitgeist recently around this global treaty. And you've been working on a lot of scientific papers. I mean, let's just jump right into it. Like, tell us from your perspective the state of the union with what's going on with respect to this issue.
Sure. Could I share some slides?
Yeah, let's see if we can figure out how to make that work.
I'll try to share mine here. Are you ready?
I'm ready. There we go. How about there?
You got it?
Yep. We're good.
So I want to talk about just the science. We've had a chance to be publishing 4 papers in the last 6 months. It's been a good year for science for us, but a good year for science overall. And, the private and public sector and NGOs, government leaders, all coming together, thinking of, with all the science we know, what is the global strategy? So I'm talking a bit about some of the science that we've done here at Five Gyres. Just published this paper this week on plastics in terrestrial mammals. A lot of the work and a lot of the context of the conversation is oceans, but keep in mind this is a global strategy. A global impact of plastic pollution on land and sea. And on land in Dubai, in the region of Dubai, a 1% mortality rate of mainly plastic bags impacting camels. So just make the point, this is global, not just oceans, it's everywhere.
But can you go back there real quick, Marcus?
Yeah, of course.
Camel stomachs, when you and Anna have been wheeling them around at conferences, and it's pretty insane. I mean, they're massive.
So the one that you can see are labeled D, I took a saw in my backyard and I cut it in half. And if you look at the research paper online, you'll see this giant potato just cut right in the middle, and its plastic is all the way throughout. And that tells you something about how do we manage this issue. On the back end, there's a need to recover from the environment and get better at recovery. but managing, then the focus has got to be on prevention. And that's the UN strategy proposal. Is it's first and foremost is let's prevent the problem in the first place, and then get better at managing all that waste. So this paper, I think, is
Marcus just cut out. We're having incredible tough technical difficulties this year, but there you came back. There you are. You're back. Ooh, but I can't hear you. Oh, now you're good. We're good.
Okay. The next research paper is looking at outside of the subtropical gyres. The gyres got all the attention. That was the sensationalized, the mythical islands of trash. And now we know it's far and beyond that. We published this paper about 6 months ago. And in the Arctic, we're finding a lot of fishing gear, but then also some consumer packaging. And look at this bottom corner picture here. The company makes this candy bar. The last thing you want is your logo on a piece of plastic trash frozen in an iceberg. So this again calls to the private sector. How can we manage this material better and prevent some of these problematic plastics from escaping or being made in the first place? And this paper, another one I was involved in, was looking at plastics in seabirds. You know, I should point out there's a great researcher, her last name is Kuhn, published a paper in 2015, identified over 500 species ingesting or getting entangled in plastics. They just published a new paper identifying over 900. So the rate of increase of species impacts is also skyrocketing. But you know, if we look at these plastics, often people say, what is the single silver bullet solution? And as you know, there isn't one. Every sector is different. How you manage textiles is very different than how you manage single-use plastics. And fishing gear is very different from durable goods or hospital waste.
I love the way that you break this down. This is like one of my favorite. Actually, I have this hanging, Marcus, right next to the desk, because it's just like it's a great way.
A different strategy, right?
Yeah, well, it's just so complex, right? I mean, it's like you think about cigarette butts. TerraCycle can recycle cigarette butts, you know, but it's few and far between when you get into like the big picture part of the problem. So, I mean, you talk about like consumer packaged goods and fishing gears being like the big sort of definitely noticeable issues when it comes to ocean plastic. But what about textiles? What about, the microfibers? It's just that we don't know a lot about these microfibers from tires and textiles yet, or?
We don't, if we talk about the research, and I had a chance yesterday to listen to a presentation by Stephanie Wright, Chelsea Rockman, and Bart Coleman's, a great presentation talking about some of the data gaps. And one is the smallest nano and small microplastic particles. So you look at textiles, what is the distribution of fibers or small particles of plastics from broken down consumer goods? That's a data gap. But I should say we do know enough to act, and we are acting. But I think this pie chart here, it helps us to reduce the complexity. Think of how we solved the hole in the ozone layer, 30 years ago. We had focused on CFCs from refrigerants. It was focused, it was clear, and there was a lot of work to stop the release of CFCs. Simple. This is so complex. When you try to apply a solution to all these at one time, you're going to get too confused. It doesn't apply. One solution doesn't apply. So how you manage cigarette butts? Do we want to pick up every cigarette butt, or is there a better way to design the cigarette butt so that it's not so persistent? But textiles, whole suite of solutions. Well, we won't get into each one, but each one has, and we have met them, a group of stakeholders managing pellet loss. You've got industry working on pellets and with the clean sweep program. With fishing gear.
What's the clean sweep program?
Clean sweep is simply
turtle prevention to keep the pellets out of the oceans.
Yes, Operation Clean Sweep, and that is if you're making pellets, and that's at their production level, you're sweeping up your grounds. You're keeping pellets from leaving your factory in the production process. And when they get received, a company that's making some plastic packaging, that they contain the space where they're unloading pellets. So it's an industry-led effort to reduce pellet loss. So each of these sectors has a different suite of stakeholders and different suite of solutions coming from industry, from government and NGOs. So I think we're going to focus on the two. And I like to think about the harm. Which ones, if you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck, you got to go where the harm is. If you look at all the research studies out there, the vast majority point to consumer goods packaging, a lot of single-use plastics, and fishing gear. Now, sure, you got harm coming from cigarette butts, the chemistry of what's on the cigarette butts, hospital waste that doesn't get managed correctly, the loss of pellets. But yeah, you can focus on these two. That's a nice bang for your buck.
Totally. So quick question about, like, I guess, would you just lump the mask issue and the gloves under hospital waste, or like increased hospital waste, or it's
exactly. So we are seeing I've seen quite a few papers published now on, the impact of COVID-19 on plastics. The more masks, I mean, I can go walk around my block, I'm sure I'll see a mask on the ground. They're kind of all over the place. It's the newest single-use throwaway plastic. Add that to the list, somewhere between sanitary materials and consumer packaging. So yeah, I think COVID's adding a whole new layer to this. But I think you can lump it in, like you said, with these others. And when we think about these two, fishing gear and consumer packaging, in the consumer packaging space, there's a lot of innovation. And what I really liked about Ocean Plastic Leadership Summit is there was a strong, innovative sort of feeling going on among all the stakeholders there on the ship. And it was pretty amazing space. And I met some of the folks who are making, some different kinds of polymers. One that we're really interested in that I think has a promising place in the future of packaging is a stuff called PHA, polyhydroxyl alkanoate. And we had done an earlier study. I put a PHA, a little beach toy, in a milk crate weighted with a bunch of bricks, along with a bunch of PLA products, and put them under a fishing dock in Long Beach, California, for about 2 years.
Marcus, I just want to call out really quick. Your backyard science efforts are incredible, and such good. Maybe really quickly, like PHA and PLA. PHA, tell me where I'm wrong here, is made from microbes. So it actually is produced through something akin to a beer vat, where you have living organisms that are producing this material.
Exactly.
There's issues they've had trouble scaling it to be able to keep up with traditional plastic production. And PLA is made from corn byproducts, correct?
Yes, exactly. You can take modern plants and make PLA. You can take lactic acid.
Plants, PHA comes from microbes. So now we're back on the dock. You have toys made of PHA and PLA. You're lowering that in the water.
Put in the water. It's actually under Captain Charles Moore's dock. He was the guy that found the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 1999. Personal friend, lives in Long Beach. I said, "Hey, Charlie, can I put this box of plastic under your dock?" He's like, "Go for it." So 2 years later, I pull up this milk crate covered in oysters and full of worms and so forth, all these marine organisms. And I had all the little nylon little mesh bags. If you recall from OPLS, we had a nylon mesh little baggie at the end of our net, our manta trawl. I used about 30 of those, put the products inside, and that PHA beach toy, it was gone. The PLA products, they're compostable, need industrial composting. They're not biodegradable in the environment. But PHA, companies like Danimer Scientific and Full Cycle Bioplastics are making these materials. Full Cycle Bioplastics, I went to go visit them. They're taking food waste, they're fermenting it, and they're taking the PHA out of the bodies of microbes. Little microbes, they make PHA, they use to store energy. You can take that out and you can make a material, PHA, that mimics plastic in its functionality. But then the question is, if a PHA bag or a fork or a spoon or a straw gets lost in the environment, what happens next? So we're actually doing another PHA study starting next year, where we're going to take PHA products, a whole suite of products, and put them under a fishing dock, put them in 6 environments: cold climate, warm climate, desert, swamp, a river. It's a cool study. And it should give the market some idea of what does biodegradation in PHA really mean, and make it very visual. It's a fun little, like it's a backyard study. It's hands-on field work. It's going to be well-documented, good media. So we should have some good answers in a couple of years about this material, how it performs. So I think this is answering that previous question. You're going to focus on these two, the consumer packaging focus to reduce the harm. Let's look at the innovation that's out there. And I want to talk about the bigger picture, because we're talking about global strategy, right?
We are.
The bigger picture, I had a chance to be involved in a couple studies. This one is still pending, showing, prior to 2000, look at the chart here. We now have so much data on ocean plastics. We know from 2000 and before, there was a steady increase in ocean pollution from plastics on the surface only. From 2000 onward, the surface of the ocean is super contaminated, and the trajectory is skyrocketing. And this is really prompting the need for a global strategy. So this is the trend. It's an increasing trend. So what do we do about it? And here's a paper I worked on, and I was with some amazing people. Laurent Le Breton, Chelsea Rockman, Stephanie Burrell, really good researchers, all working on this. And we were looking at, okay, 3 possible scenarios. If we're business as usual, keep on going like we're going, we can see by 2030, in a decade, be up to our necks in plastic trash. We've got to do something. We all know that. So how about an ambitious target, an ambitious strategy? An ambitious strategy is we employ a lot of the things that we're already doing and want to do. This is not including a global strategy. It hasn't been discussed yet. And ambitious based on the current mitigation strategies. We're going to be not up to our necks, up to our knees in plastic by 2030.
And when you say mitigation strategy, really, you're referencing like banning stuff, in mass, correct?
Banning stuff, trying to increase just recycling, focusing on one of these strategies alone. That's kind of where the thoughts had been the last 10 years. And there have been some ambitious goals about banning single-use plastics, about increasing recycling opportunities, helping countries improve waste management. That's ambitious strategy, but it's not enough. Based on our modeling, and this is some of the best modeling that we've had a chance to do. Jenna Jambek was part of this study. If we look at the amount of trash lost by cities, washing up on beaches, floating in the oceans, being used by islands, the global trade of trash, an ambitious strategy based on current mitigation ideas is not going to cut it. What we need is this third one, a targeted strategy, where we're setting targets. Jenna Jambek published a monumental paper estimating 8 million tons of plastic leaving our coastlines worldwide back in 2015. It's been perhaps the most referenced study out there. Based on that, how do we get things below, by 2030, below 8 million tons, way below 8 million tons? We got to set targets. Targets on enforceable targets. How much is allowed to leave city? And this means you got to monitor those plastics. How can we create targets for waste management, percentage of waste and what gets managed, as opposed to what gets mismanaged? Targets on the problematic plastics, reducing those. Targets on recovery, knowing plastics are polluting coastlines and the seafloor worldwide, reducing those by collecting them. So by setting targets, and that's where the global strategy comes in, because it sets those targets. That's what we have to do.
When we say global strategy, we're referring to like this global treaty, this Paris Accord for plastics that is being talked about quite a bit. Well, I think I just got the global treaty slide. I advanced it for you. This is good.
Yeah, so this is all the talk. There's been so much dialogue in the last year, and these are some quotes I got from some of the reports coming from the UN, from the private sector, from corporations. New global agreement, global action, global agreement, urgent global response. So everyone's talking about it, and then in the last 6 months, we have seen a lot of action. If you look at these last 3 reports. The one on the far right, the Nordic Council Ministers, that came out last week. The big one just 2 weeks ago, the business case for a UN treaty, just came out 2 weeks ago. And just prior to that, from the NGO community, the Convention on Plastic Pollution, toward a new global agreement to address plastic pollution. So this is the dialogue now. I think in 2021, this is where OPLN is perfectly positioned to embrace this conversation, and to have it is, what does that global strategy look like in a way that we can bring in all stakeholders from both the public and private sector and NGOs. So that's where
the OPLN, for those that may not know, is our organization, SoulBuffalo's Ocean Plastic Leadership Network. And, I think it's like, it's interesting when you look at these reports, and so much is, I've been in so many conversations, Marcus, about these specific reports, not as much about the Nordic Council of Ministers, and I have not gotten to dig into that one yet. But when you look at the World Wildlife Fund and Ellen MacArthur and Boston Consulting Group's report, and then put that against the CL and Gyre report, I mean, there's just different strategies, or at least like the early communication is different, where this is the business case is really coming from industry for the report that came out from WWF, which we're starting to see like a really large industry support for this type of initiative, which is huge, and big important companies that are very high on the list like the way that you what you mentioned earlier, as far as like where people are seeing their logos wash up in different places, are a part of that. And then, but then when you get into the environmental NGO side of the house, they want to see more just like reduction targets, virgin plastic reduction targets. So there is a divide, and I'm cueing you for this is Marcus's. This is one of Marcus's core thesis. This divide.
Yeah, this idea of a great divide between the NGO community and many organizations that are focused on this from the NGO side. And I hate to use the word versus, because I'd like to find
Marcus froze. Oh, there you are. You froze for a second. Can you say that again? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now you're good. Perfect.
All right, good. So this idea of a great divide, I would like to think it's more like a Venn diagram, where in the middle we have increasing amount of common ground, where you've got on one side is the industry, and the call for the UN strategy, the UN treaty, is really focused on industry objectives. And I got to say, everyone has their subjective perspective on this. Industry has their perspective, whereas you've got the NGO community that has theirs. And what I've seen, having been in this issue, working with a lot of NGOs, a lot of scientists, and then with corporate leaders, and hearing all perspectives, I really feel that there is much more common ground than we give credit for. I mean, nobody wants to see trash in the middle of the ocean. Everybody wants to see the harm get reduced. And that is harm to the ecological harm. That is the economic harm. And then the social harm. Nobody wants to see kids, swimming in plastic trash, the social harm. The economic harm, I think the private sector understands that very clearly, what's on the table if you see bans on products, especially the folks who are making plastics from fossil fuels, a lot on the table there as the world shifts to renewables. So there's lots of risk management there. And then think of the NGO community, who's really focused on the ecological harm, social, economic, less than the economic, more than the social and economic harm, and an ecological harm, wanting to see plastic not leave our cities, very much on a preventative strategy, even if it means eliminating some of the problematic plastics. What I like about the treaty, and I wish I could bring this up on the last slide. Can I show this real quick?
Yeah, do it.
This I got from the UN treaty document. This was really interesting. I'll show it real quick.
And we're at live. Ooh, yep.
You got this quote here?
Yep.
So this is the quote I just pulled from the private sector. The proposal for a UN treaty is this quote, and the devil's in the details, of course, but it simply says you're looking at, unless all sectors are able to work together, to three things: eliminate unnecessary and problematic plastic. Number two, reuse models, and number three, radically increase recycling levels. Those three things, I hear these same three things from the private sector and from the NGO community. There is overlap here, but again, the devil is in the details. How much emphasis do you put on eliminating unnecessary and problematic plastics? I can tell you that in the private sector, there's a resistance to ban products outright, because many companies, that's their bread and butter. That's how they keep themselves alive and employ their staff and keep bread on the table. But for a lot of the NGOs, when you look at the big picture, the NGO perspective on the true cost from extraction all the way to the impact on the pollution side, that warrants eliminating those unnecessary and problematic plastics. And of course, we know that in the private sector, there is so much innovation happening that can replace those unnecessary problematic plastics. So if we shift to reuse models, the second thing there, reuse models, to what degree can those eliminate or replace those problematic plastics and still allow these innovative companies to thrive? Reuse models such as...
Example of a reuse model would be like TerraCycle's Loop. You can look up that, where your ice cream containers come in a reusable package and you send it back or take it back to the store when you're done with it. And so it's a very macro shift.
There's one called a Vessel, and what they do is they get all the restaurants, coffee shops to share the same cup. You can bring that dirty cup to any restaurant, they clean it, give you a new one. So that's a reuse economy. Repack is another good one. It's a reusable mailer that companies like UPS and FedEx and Amazon might use. Imagine if all the packaging we're getting during COVID, you could put it all into one box and give it back to the companies making or transporting those products. So again, reusable packaging, reusable materials, that reuse economy, it is a business case for achieving that number one thing, getting rid of unnecessary and problematic plastics. But the third thing there, increasing recycling levels. Again, the devil's in the details. If we're going to increase the amount of recycling, increase the ability for emerging economies to manage their waste. And when they manage it, getting really good at sorting it. But I can tell you the NGO community really talks about the benefits of getting really good at a city level, a community level, in a village, of sorting your stuff, getting your biodegradables in a composting system, getting your recyclables that are market valuable in a recycling system, and what's left over, the residuals. Find a way to either get a reuse model and replace those, or find some innovative way to get those out of the system, because they're not biodegradable, they're not recyclable. To make things, to radically increase recycling, like this UN treaty suggests, you got to design for it. I have, from my personal experience, having met with a lot of folks in the private sector, that you will hear a lot of talk about increased recycling. And as soon as you say, well, how about a standard for designing for recycling, or a standard for you got to create economic incentives to use recycled content, then the conversation shifts. So if you're going to increase recycling levels, you got to make it recyclable, and you've got to increase the use of recycled content. So those things have to come together. And like I said, the devil's in the details. From there's
a lot of details. Marcus and I are working at a session that's like a private session with a lot of the big corporations that are consumer packaged good companies and a lot of the environmental NGOs. And I mean, the complexity just here in the US, I mean, it's unbelievably complex. I mean, like 19 points of like what would go into an extended producer response. We could do a whole show on this, but like,
yeah,
so complicated. And then you go region to region, and I mean, what's a problem here is a totally different set of problems in Africa or Southeast Asia or Europe, where they're kind of ahead of everybody else. So it's I love this quote too, Marcus. I'm glad you shared it. I have one last question for you, and then we are out of time. I know you've met just about everybody. I feel like you've met everybody in ocean plastics, but if you had the opportunity to spend some time with, let's say, like an environmental hero of yours, maybe it's somebody you already know, or maybe it's somebody you want to know, who would that be?
Wow. A single person, it's really difficult to say a single person.
Could be
I'd like to say a single group of people.
Yeah, totally.
I've been in this issue for a long time, Dave. I've been in this issue almost 20 years. And I remember in the beginning when I first met Captain Charles Moore, I worked with him for a little bit, and he said, if you want to know everything about plastic pollution, this was 16 years ago, you got to read these papers. And he handed me about 25 papers and said, this is all we know. Now, if I did that to a young researcher, it'd be almost 3,000 papers. So if I just select a group of people, it would be the young the young scientists, the young folks who are leading the NGO community, and the new emerging companies, the innovators that are just chomping at the bit to say, here is a possible solution. I love the young people who I meet that have a vision for the future. That keeps me super inspired.
Well, I'm inspired too. I'm glad I asked that question to close. But Marcus, thank you, my friend. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. It's a pleasure to work with you in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. This global treaty is going to be interesting. So it's as we sort of roll up our sleeves, it's going to be. And as an organization, we're definitely looking at ways that we can help accelerate and have this thing not take 15 years, because it needs to happen in about 2. And just super grateful for everything you've done. Any parting words before we leave?
First, I would just say this. Likewise, I love our collaboration, and it's all about that. It's all about bringing people together, and you have done that. You've got the private sector, NGOs, you got scientists on a boat in the ocean. That's what it's all about. And I think the next 2 years you're going to see big changes. So thanks, Dave. Thanks to you and your team.
Thanks, Marcus. We appreciate it. So very excited. Next on Thursday, we have another SoulBuffalo Earth Report with Keith Harrison from the Recycling Partnership. Super excited to see Keith, old friend, as well. She also was on said boat, and and I've some other folks from the Recycling Partnership as well. So anyway, we'll talk soon, my friend. Have a really great day. Cheers.
Thanks, Dave. All right, take care.
All right, you
Bye,
too.
everyone.